What if we could actually measure a nation's happiness? And I don't mean by just asking people to rate it on a scale from 1 to 10. I mean, what if we could listen to the very words they use every single day? Well, today, we're going to dig into a really groundbreaking project that's trying to do exactly that. Okay, so let's get right into it. This is a question we've been trying to answer for, well, a long time. But really, how do you put a number on something as personal, as subjective, as just well-being? For decades, the answer was pretty simple. It was all about economic growth. We looked at things like GDP. But this whole field of happiness economics came along and basically said, whoa, hold on, that's just a tiny piece of the puzzle. Real well-being, that's about our health, our connections with people, our sense of freedom. We need a way to measure that. So, if simple numbers just aren't cutting it, how in the world do we crack the code? How do we start to understand this incredibly rich, complex story of what makes people happy, but on a massive scale? Well, the key, it turns out, is a field of AI called natural language processing. You'll hear it called NLP. And what it does is pretty amazing. It basically teaches computers how to read and understand our language. It turns them into these super fast linguistic detectives. And this is where things get really interesting. The focus shifts away from just simple ratings, numbers on a scale, and moves toward rich, actual narratives. Instead of just a 7 out of 10, NLP lets us analyze the authentic, detailed stories people are sharing in places like open-ended surveys, social media, or even in interviews. Okay, so let's look at how this awesome idea actually becomes a real project with clear, measurable goals. This is where the theory really hits the road. First up, they needed a clear target for success. The AI has to be at least 85% accurate when it's figuring out if text is positive or negative. And that's a pretty ambitious goal, right? It's right up there with what the best industry models are doing today. But it's not just about happy or sad. The project also needs to identify at least 5 major themes that are driving those feelings. This is the real magic, right? It's the why behind the data. Are people talking about work-life balance, their community, healthcare? That's the gold. And then there's the practical, bottom-line value. By automating all of this analysis, the goal is to slash the time it takes to process this kind of qualitative data by a whopping 70%. I mean, that is a massive leap in efficiency. Okay, but this project has a really fascinating challenge. It's designed specifically for Hebrew, which is what's called a morphologically rich language. So what does that even mean? Well, think about it like this. In English, if we say "and in the house," that's 4 separate words. Easy. But in Hebrew, different prefixes and suffixes can cram all of that meaning into just a single word. As you can imagine, for an AI, trying to analyze that is incredibly tricky. So, to deal with that complexity, they needed a special 4-step process. First, the AI has to do what's called tokenization, basically just breaking the text up into words. Then, it normalizes it, fixes slang and typos. But here's the really crucial step: morphological segmentation. That's where it breaks those super complex words down into their core parts. It's only after all that happens that it can start to pick out key things and actually understand the real meaning. So at this point, the team knew what they wanted to do. They understood the technical hurdles. The next massive question was how? How do you actually build the tool to get this done? And they faced a classic strategic choice, one that a lot of tech projects face. Do you just buy an off-the-shelf tool? Do you build a totally custom model from the ground up? Or do you take a middle path and kind of assemble it using existing services? As you can see, each option has some major trade-offs when it comes to cost, speed, and how much control you have. In the end, the recommendation was pretty clear. They went with the assemble strategy, at least for the pilot phase. And this is a really smart move because it lets them use powerful existing AI models through APIs. They can test their idea fast, they can do it cost-effectively, and they don't have that huge, risky investment of building everything from scratch. Now, obviously, a tool this powerful, one that can listen in and interpret the feelings of an entire nation, that comes with a ton of responsibility. So let's talk about the ethical framework they built to make sure this project stays on the right track. They flagged 3 huge risks right from the get-go. First, there's data bias. You have to make sure the AI isn't just learning and amplifying existing stereotypes in society. Second, and this is a big one, user privacy.
You have to protect the identities of the people whose words you're analyzing. And third, you have to prevent this data from being twisted and misused for, say, political manipulation. And this isn't just talk, right? There's a very concrete plan to protect people's privacy. They use different techniques depending on where the data is coming from. So for surveys, they might use something called pseudonymization. That's basically replacing real names with codes. But for something like public social media posts, they'd use data masking, literally blocking out any and all sensitive info. Okay, so the tech is chosen, the ethical guardrails are in place. So what's next? Let's look at the path forward. How does this thing grow from a small pilot project into a really powerful new tool? The whole roadmap is laid out in 3 really clear phases. Phase 1 is a quick 3-month pilot, just to prove the concept works. Simple enough. That's followed by a 6-month implementation phase, where they'll build out a user-friendly dashboard so people can actually use the insights. And then finally, phase 3 is all about scale, expanding to new data sources and making sure the AI is always learning and getting smarter. And all of this brings us to the final and maybe the most important question. A project like this shows we're getting so much closer to truly understanding what matters to people and doing it at a massive scale. But, knowing what makes us happy, that's really just the first step. The real challenge, and maybe the real opportunity, is what we as a society decide to do with that knowledge.